Collision and Glass Roundtable with Rick Ralph is back on your home of the Winnipeg Jets. TSN 1290. TSN1290.ca.
Darrin Bauming and Michael Remis in for Rick Ralph. It's Jets Lunch and the Don Vito Roundtable on TSN 1290 and on TSN 3. Waiting to catch up with those Team Canada members from 1972 Summit Series, Ken Dryden and Brad Park. Hoping to catch up with them in just a few minutes' time as well. Kenny Albert from NBC Sports is going to join us a little bit later in the program as well. But last night, Winnipeg Blue Bombers open up the CFL preseason, and their preseason with a 36-13 victory over the Montreal Alouettes. Their first preseason victory at Investors Group Field since it opened just over 3 years ago. And trailing in this game, Mike, 13-3 midway through the second quarter, 33 unanswered points for the blue and gold to come away with a victory in this one. It was quite impressive the way the number 2s and the number 3s played.
Yeah, Darrin, it's amazing to think how little success the Bombers have had since moving into Investors Group Field. I mean, success at winning at the stadium. I mean, it's the nicest stadium in the CFL. You know, you'd think that the greatest team would come with it, but that's not quite the case. You know, Kyle Walters, Wade Miller, Mike O'Shea, they've been building this team over the last couple of years, and it seems to me like this is the year where everything has to come together and they have to make the playoffs. I mean, Darrin, if they miss the playoffs again, that has to be a complete failure of a season, correct?
This is the final year of the 3-year contract general manager Kyle Walters signed. The final year of the 3-year contract head coach Mike O'Shea signed. 7 wins in year 1, 5 wins last year. They need to hit 500. They need to get into the playoffs. This team hasn't played in the playoffs since that 2011 season with Buck Pierce at quarterback, and they went to the Grey Cup and ultimately lost to BC in BC Place. I can't imagine anything but at least a playoff appearance being good enough to keep things the way they are.
It's amazing to think that in a league with, 8 teams,
now 9.
Yeah. The small amount of teams, the Bombers haven't won the Grey Cup in so long. I mean, they've come so close. I remember back in that Grey Cup with Buck Pierce where, they just needed that stop on defense. I mean, there was a picked ball that was tipped up by a defender, couldn't quite come down with the interception.
Odell Willis, yes.
Odell Willis.
Easy pick six.
If he comes in with that, I mean, the Bombers franchise, the whole story completely changes. But here we are again. I think fans can be completely optimistic, but I mean, the last couple of years we've been optimistic, but then they started playing games. But this year, I mean, why is this year different than other years of the past where we had some optimism?
From what I'm seeing, it's just organizational depth. We got to see last night in that preseason opener a little bit of the number ones. Drew Willie and the first-team offense. Ryan Smith, Darvin Adams, Andrew Harris, the first-team offensive line. And really, Montreal, in particular, Kevin Glenn, looking really impressive at 36 years of age. No rust in his first preseason game, was extremely effective in the pocket and picked apart this Blue Bombers first-team defense. But once the number 2s came in and then down the depth chart to the number 3s, that's where Winnipeg really showed a lot of good things against Montreal's number 2s and number 3s. That's the big departure from years past, where beyond the starters, even some of the starters, but definitely beyond the starters to the backups and the depth Canadians, that this team didn't have enough talent to compete in the CFL. It's pro football. Injuries are going to happen. You need to have good talent behind your number 1s if you want to compete. And there's no better example of that than last year when Drew Willie went down with a season-ending injury in Week 7.
Yeah, and Drew Willie, 6 attempts yesterday, 3 for 6, passed for 52 yards. But how did Matt Nichols look? I mean, 3 for 3, 14 yards. Can we expect him to be a competent backup behind Drew Willie this season?
I just look at his performance last year, because in that game last night, he pretty much had one series, and it was in and out. We know Matt Nichols is going to be the number 2. They wanted to see Dominique Davis, who started Week 20 last year. They wanted to see more of him, and then the newcomer, Brian Bennett, who's up from the NFL after a cup of coffee with the Indianapolis Colts. When it comes to Matt Nichols, last year, he managed the game. He wasn't going to he's never expected to do anything spectacular, but he is a good option to have as a contingency plan if something does happen to Drew Willy. Drew Willy has shown the ability to win games late in football games, run the 2-minute drill and march the field and win games. He did that quite often, actually, in his first year as a starter back in 2014. Last year, injured, obviously, and wasn't able to do it. The team was 3-3 when he got hurt in Week 7. Matt Nichols is as advertised. He'll get the job done. He'll keep you in football games. And what did we see from him last year? We saw him manage the game and Winnipeg within striking distance of beating the Edmonton Eskimos at home. And they lost by 2 points, and they missed a lot of field goals in that game. And they've moved on from Liram Hajrullahu. They've lost by a point to the Calgary Stampeders. He had them right there. They were just unable to close the door and finish off their opponent. You'd hope with an improved defense, with a revamped offense with Paul LaPolice, that Matt Nichols is a contingency plan, but that this offense is going to be able to win football games where it wasn't able to do that under Marcel Belfait the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think so, Darrin. And I mean, having a backup quarterback extremely important in the NFL and the CFL. Injuries are going to happen. You have to prepare. But you look at the around the team, they made a big splash in free agency. The Blue Bombers did. Who excites you the most of the new players coming in?
I think we saw a flash of it last night in that one screen pass to Andrew Harris where he got to the second level, started breaking some tackles, started making some guys miss. You're like, wow, okay, this is what this guy is capable of doing. There's questions about the BC Lions. When Wally Buono generally, cuts ties with a player that is of elite status, you look at, there's been a handful of them over the years that he's been the general manager, that player is going to regress, that they've hit their zenith of their football career. It looks like Andrew Harris has a lot left in the tank. That's an exciting thing for this team because they haven't had a running back of that elite level since maybe Fred Reed, but probably all the way back to Charles Roberts, in the early to mid-2000s in those Kahari Jones offenses where you had a big arm, he could stretch the field, and that gave Charles Roberts a lot of space to work running the football and coming out of the backfield. I think Andrew Harris is going to be a real X factor to determine how successful this offense is.
Yeah, Darrin, when you have that X factor, again, takes pressure off the quarterback,
right, and
you have those, can maybe have some big plays underneath. But again, the Bombers completely revamping the receivers as well. We didn't see Weston Dressler yesterday, right, but we saw Ryan Smith. I mean, how much are these guys going to help Drew Willy this season?
Some people look at these guys, they're 5'7", they're 5'8", they're small, they're limited in their abilities to be effective all over the football field. But I think Ryan Smith, in particular, the one grab he had for 32 yards, he had 2 targets and the one catch from Drew Willy, is that it's regardless of his diminutive size, he is effective everywhere all over the field because he is quick enough. There's speed and there's quickness. He's quick enough to find separation, is very sure-handed. I think he is the one. It's maybe being overlooked a little bit because he's only got 1 year of CFL experience. And also, Weston Dressler coming over and entering his 9th year and being a near perennial 1,000-yard receiver, that Ryan Smith is going to be the guy who could potentially break out and be a superstar in this league. What I'm really excited to see, Mike, is some of these young receivers. Who's going to fight for that 5th receiver spot next to Kohler, next to Darvin Adams and Smith and Dressler? Is it Jace Davis? Thomas Mayo had a good game last night. Gerard Shepard is in that mix. Chris Adams has been banged up in training camp, but he's an intriguing name. It's been a long time. Really, this Bombers scouting staff hasn't found a lot of game breakers on offense. They found a lot of good players on defense as far as American rookies and free agents, but to find one of, a couple of these receivers who look like real gamers with size at 6'2", 6'3", to complement Dressler and Smith, I think that's where they're going to find a nice complementary piece.
Okay, Darrin, we've talked about the offense. We've gone through some of the new pieces. But looking at the defense, I mean, they brought in Keith Shulligan. Jamal Westerman has another year under his belt in the CFL. I mean, what kind of defense can we see from the Bombers this season?
In talking to some of the players, it's interesting because they're reassured being in the same system as they were last year. Richie Hall hasn't changed much, in the language or the, nomenclature is one of the words that they like to throw around, that terminology as far as the defense. But because they've improved their talent so much, and in particular, a brand new defensive front, yes, Jamal Westerman is back. He was their lone CFL All-Star, but adding a veteran Canadian in Keith Shulligan, and Euclid Cummings, by all accounts of players both on offense and defense that I've talked to through this Blue Bombers training camp, this guy is a real stud. 8 sacks last year in his first year in the Canadian Football League with the Toronto Argonauts. Had a couple sniffs in the National Football League, but nothing came to fruition. He could be a real game breaker. So when you add all of this talent, it allows Richie Hall to be a little bit more aggressive, to try some different things, to force offenses into, allowing the defense to dictate the pace and what's happening in these games. I just think that influx of talent in the defensive backfield and on that defensive line is really going to allow Richie Hall to open things up. It's going to be a fun defense to watch.
Yeah, so we looked at, the betting, we looked at the lines. What was the Bombers line earlier this month? Wasn't 6.5 wins
right.
over under?
Bodog had that, yeah.
Bodog had that. So you're taking the over, no question, right?
I think without a doubt, this is at least a 7, 8, 9 win team. I have them winning 10 games. That's me. A lot of people have them at 500. I'm not sold on Chris Jones being able to turn Saskatchewan around quickly in this West Division with a little bit maybe of a lack of Canadian talent, some question marks on the offensive line. And same with the BC Lions. It's a bit of a tire fire with what Jeff Tedford did with the BC Lions last year. They've got a young, strong-arm quarterback in Jonathan Jennings, but I don't know if they're going to be able to really compete with Edmonton and with Calgary in this West. I see Winnipeg being that number 3 team. If they can get some wins over those East Division teams throughout the season and essentially jockey themselves into that number 3 spot in the West, they're going to be 9-10 wins. I'm confident in that this year, and I've seen a lot of bad football over the last couple of years covering this Blue Bombers team. This is not a bad football team. I think they're going to be really competitive this year.
Well, Darrin, hopefully we can see more wins at IG Field than we have in the last few seasons because, as you mentioned at the start of this segment, what has it been, 8 total?
Yeah, 8 total if you include that preseason win last night. 7-20 in the regular season at Investors Group Field, so surely fans are going to be looking forward to leaving the field in brighter spirits than they have the last few years. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, Kenny Albert from NBC Sports is going to join us. Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals is tonight as the Penguins look to clinch the series and hoist the Stanley Cup. Michael Remis and Darrin Bauming in for Rick Ralph. You're listening to Jets Lunch on the Don Vito Roundtable on TSN 1290 and on TSN 3.